ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fears slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got all of the loving growing inside.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the New Now. I am super delighted to have a chance to talk longer with Jared George from the Great Order. We're going to discuss so many lovely things, including levels of legacy, which is what I'm going to talk and share for the title for this one. In other words, what a man and a woman can leave behind in their life that perhaps can help the rest of us. And this will be related to Jared, who will be announcing the release of a brand new song of his. But I'll let him speak for himself. Jared, welcome to the New Now. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, Lorenzo, it's nice to speak to you. So what we've done, a short intro thus far, and I also was part of a little, about 3-4 person panel as a pre-show, as a prelude to the New Now that's launching on, I don't know when this very video we're recording now is going to be published, but probably right before New Now live event on Wednesday, the 21st of July. So you and I did a short little video. We did the prelude to the New Now, and now we have a chance to talk a little longer. So I'm happy to do that today. I think that you were saying to me, you and I, like when we've done these little short bits recently, off air, we always have more to say to each other. And you're like, you could feel it starting to go, and where it could be one of those conversations that's a good 45 minutes to an hour. So you said, why don't we do that? I know you've been doing that with some other folks. So happy to be here. But yeah, just as a short introduction, my platform and also de facto band name is The Great Order. It's only more recently that I've started putting out songs one at a time. I'm a musician, recording artist, songwriter. But it actually was, funny enough, for a number of reasons, the last thing to factor into my public presentation, but it's really the main thing that I'm into, and the real way that I want to leave my voice in the world, so to speak. And you mentioned the fourth song coming out is called What's in Us. And I don't know if I've used this term with you, Lorenzo, or not. Tell me if it rings a bell. But I stumbled upon this turn of phrase I've been using, that there's a convergence of awakenings right now. So I think that song, I don't like to be too heavy-handed about my lyrics, and I certainly don't like to tell people what to think of them. But I think it's pretty obvious once people hear the song that it addresses a lot of what's going on in the world right now on a few different levels. And it's pretty basic. It's something you can dance to. It's got a catchy chorus. It's not anything too complex. But I'm hoping that it makes an impact and it's the right thing for the summer of 2021. And it just so happens that I'm wrapping it up right as you're starting this New Now project and this meeting of different people, different minds from around the world. So I'm happy that we'll be playing it, and it'll your platform will be one of the initial launch points for this song, What's in Us.
So happy to hear that. It's like, the little boy in me that was always a fan of great creators and great producers of content, music, art. Always wanted to be able to dance, so to speak, and be in the presence of the kind of creators that my heart always wanted to spend time with, which is why I originally reached out to you. As I saw some of your presentations on Red Ice, on what you were talking about, it really sang to me, if you'll pardon the pun, and what we're talking about. And then, from there, it's something I've shared with people forever, is that, just, get off your ass and make the connections you want and reach out, and you never know what kind of beauty, love, song, art is going to come your way and allow you to live that life.
Yeah, we were talking a little about this as well, where it's a harmonization. Everything kind of comes down to harmonization of poles and looking at things and trying to integrate into yourself, I guess, a more of a holistic way of being and thinking and doing things. So on the one hand, one of the ways to look at that holistic viewpoint would be, one of the breakdowns is, on the one hand, of course, you have to be logical and plan things out. But on the other hand, there's the intuition that you were speaking about. And I know that word gets thrown around a lot, and it probably, some people might even sensitize to the word, follow your intuition. We see memes about things like that all of the time. But you're right in that My experience has been that you put the energy out first. You have a feeling about something or behind something, and the force of that creates a path that you wouldn't necessarily know was there if you were just in an intellectual, if you were just in your headspace and writing out a plan, let's say goals and step by step. Obviously, the two need to synergize, and you often bounce between those two things, your rational mind and using your intuition. But the engine, like the excitement of what you're talking about, where when you see someone and you want to reach out to that person, or you see a circumstance, a situation happening, and you don't know how yet, but you want to participate, you want to be involved. It seems to me that pure energy, the enthusiasm that a kid would have, I think it's really important to not lose that as an adult. Like if you can marry the adult rational mind with that childlike openness, curiosity, and the purity of just fun spirit and wanting to enjoy life and play with things, if you can marry those two things, you're really doing pretty well. And I think at root, maybe some people don't want to even admit that. Maybe it sounds like you're not being a responsible adult if you say that out loud. But it seems that, again, just from my own observations, what people are hurting or striving towards, they want that because in their peak moments, in their best moments, in their freest moments, it seems that those peak times, you do have that marriage of those different polarities, of that groundedness and that openness simultaneously. On a physiological level, I think breath has a lot to do with it too. All that stuff about deep breathing, again, that's not a cliche either. It really does connect that intuitive side, your gut, and your brain.
100%. You know, if you look at the world and what's being denied, so to speak, most people, you can see, you know, the lack of modern importance on the breath. I would follow through, you know, whether it's pollution in the air or a lack of oxygen, or, you know, working inside too much is, in my opinion, being very detrimental to people's imagination, their creativity. And, you know, when you're a little boy, as you say, or when you're a younger lad, I don't know about anybody else, but I always wanted to be outside. You couldn't keep me in the house. You know, I would disappear in the morning and come back at night and be outside as much as I could. And I think that's a natural, I don't know if it's in the modern day, you see too many people with computers, I'll say plugged up their asses, seems to me, but, or cell phones, but you pardon my language. But it seems to me, you know, the feeling of wanting to get out there and being alive in the world is essential.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. It made me think of part of my writing process. I need to be out and moving a lot. So taking walks is part of it. And even though it's using a technology that I guess you could say is adding to some pollution, but we know that there's kind of a couple sides to that, because that whole pollution, there's pollution in the world and that needs to be addressed. But I think we both know that the kind of Greta thing, the green movement, feeling a little fishy about that. It's one of the many things that are co-opted by the powers that be for a control agenda. But that's a bit of a different subject. All I was saying is that I'll go on a drive, let's say, and I'll put, say, an instrumental bed of a song I'm working on. Let's say I don't have the lyrics or the melody yet. And I'll drive and I'll just kind of hum things to myself and see if a melody starts coming or certain key words start coming for a hook of the song. Because there's something to that movement. And there's something also to the fact that your conscious mind isn't 100% on it, because obviously you're operating the car as well. So part of your mental horsepower has to be towards just operating the car. But it kind of is one of these tricks I have to let that intuitive, creative, playful side in through the back door. But whether it's car driving or it's taking a walk, I need a lot of movement, it seems, in my creative process. So I definitely understand what you're saying, especially now where I am. It's summer. You want to be outside a lot.
100%. I found anytime I get a block, and most of the writing I do, poetry or you know, even artistic endeavors, come when my you know, part of me is asleep, and usually, you know, my head is quiet and the rest of me can wake up and allow the inspirations that come from, you know, who knows where they come from, but they come if you let them. You know, that's something I've always wanted to share with people as well. You quiet the
Yeah.
mind. If you don't have an answer, go take a walk, be quiet, asking your heart for what you want, whether it's a melody, as you say, or a song or a direction in life. Usually, if not always, it comes to you, or so I found.
And it sounds like that's what you were saying before with people and projects, where we're talking about something like songwriting or poetry, but really you're creating your life first and foremost. Again, I know what that sounds like. I know it sounds cliched or like a Hallmark card, but it is true. And I don't to a certain degree, we don't want to apologize for it, just state it plainly. That's that childlike thing again. I told myself, I promised myself that as much as I'm devoted to making music, and there's a lot that goes into that, it can't destroy my life itself. There's something even more important than music, and that's my life itself. And that has to be the ultimate work of art. And so what you were saying, how you're putting together the new now, and you're following your intuition, you're just going with who feels right, seeing, like, following what's most exciting, what thrills you the most, that kind of thing does, sometimes a lot happens very quickly. It's like the currency is higher, like the electric is higher. So all of a sudden you just blast through. You don't even it doesn't really feel like work, right? You're just blasting all these exciting things going on. You might be technically working hard, working long hours, but there's a lightness to it. But I do think that, people do need some guidance or help. We all need to help each other to kind of clear out some toxins too, mentally and spiritually,
For sure.
because I'm being someone who speaks publicly. I do have to be aware that different things that we say up here are going to hit different people where they are, and we're all at different points in our adventures in our lives. And for some people, maybe they're gucked up and there's a lot of layers of confusion and hurt and some mixed signals. And if you tell them to follow what feels good, they might do something to really hurt themselves or someone else. If they're a drug addict, well, it's not as so simple just to say, well, do what feels good, because they're going to go for that next hit and they're going to hurt themselves in the long run. So obviously I say all this with the understanding that, you've done a certain amount of work, at least to get to a baseline where you're integrated. There's a certain amount of self-regulation. I know Carl Jung spoke about that in your psyche. What was that?
What did you say? I missed that.
Self-regulation.
Right.
That your life is balanced enough where, you're in a pretty good cycle of, again, you can look at it mentally, physically, spiritually, any of those lenses, that there's enough integration where there's a baseline level of health. It's not like your lifestyle, your emotions, or your moods are just swinging all over the place from different extremes, one to the next, and you can't trust yourself to get things done or be consistent with your relationships and things like that. Obviously, if things are really wild and around, then again, you probably have some things to do to clean out before you can get to that trusting intuition aspect. It's a tricky thing to talk about, that trusting intuition thing, because it does assume a certain baseline level of that health, but then again, there's no end point. It's not like you've ever arrived. There's always a journey, and there's always more to learn, and there's always blind spots you have that you keep discovering.
I mean, we all walked ourselves to whatever challenges we have, in my opinion. You've brought the pain. I figure accepting responsibility for all the circumstances of your life would be a good starting point for developing your intuition. If anyone's asking, how do I do that if I don't have intuition or it's not working? I've seen a lot of comments in some of the videos that are saying, I hear what you guys are saying and I'm inspired when I'm listening. Some of the other fellows and ladies that have shared with us, but when I turn off the computer and I go sit in the room, I don't know where to begin, for my own healing. And I would figure if you accept responsibility for everything sitting in front of you, good, bad, ugly, fantastic, probably it gives you a good starting point for at least the power or the self direction of where things could move for yourself.
I agree with that, Lorenzo. That sounds right to me. Yeah, that's a good benchmark, because a lot of the kinds of people that are experiencing those wild swings of emotions or energy or just their health, uh, a lot of times when you confront them with the idea that they are responsible for these things and you want to have sovereignty over their life, over your life, you're going to start getting a lot of pushback. Sometimes it might be angry, or sometimes it might just be excuses and all of the voice of self-justification. But if you could at least get to that baseline where there's a responsibility, I agree that definitely shows a level of commitment to your own, that you're conscious and aware enough that you're making choices, because that's really what's one of the things that sets us apart from other animals, right? Is we use our thoughts and we use our intentions and we voice them through speech, to move through the world and make choices. That's not to say on an instinctual level animals don't make choices. Technically they do, but without, I would hope we don't have to, take time to defend this, but I would think most people could just accept at face value without having to defend it, that there's something different about human choice. There's more going on there. There's much higher level of complexity, and that making choices and realizing that you're the one making the choices, even if it is on a very intuition level, kind of a higher self level that sometimes you're not even consciously aware of, that gets you to somewhere, that gets you to a baseline. But again, I'm not an expert in abuse and things like that, but it's not so simple to say that if someone is suffering some horrible pain at the hands of another, I don't think it's so simple to say that they created that and leave it at that. Like, why are you doing this to yourself? But I feel the thrust of what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Yeah, I would think it's
agree with the
like
direction.
situation in front of you. I mean, you don't even have to say, why am I causing this? It's more like, here it is. What can I do about it? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's the key too. I appreciate how you're keeping this on track, because these are some difficult things to talk about, and they get into very sometimes seemingly like abstract territory. But that's very true. It's one of the something that's really guided me has been that idea that you just stated, is that everything that's happened in your life, it's happened, and you don't have to necessarily analyze and say, especially again if it's some kind of abuse or an extreme situation. I don't think it's look at someone who's been a victim of that and say, oh, it's your fault, in a very matter of fact way, like you caused this, but more of the fact that it happened, and if you can avow it and accept it, and it's all of the emotions and all the experiences of your life are the material that you have to work with. Once you become conscious and you're present now, then that alchemizes, that changes your perception of all of those things. And all of a sudden, it's not the momentum of all of these things that you thought was kind of pushing you along. Like if you have this story of abuse or hurt, if you get to this kind of baseline level of conscious awareness that we've been talking about here, then it becomes something where you get to reframe what it means now. And it could, this story, instead of being, it was pushing me along and why do I always do this, or why do I always attract abusive partners or something like that, becomes, I realized this and I changed it. And it's always going through almost like a water filter. It's, if you're present enough, anything that's happened up till then, not that you want to be thinking too much about the past all the time, we don't live in the past, but when you do bring up an emotion, or you do something from the past, or something's gnawing at you and you know that it needs to be addressed, it goes through that prism, it goes through that filter of the presence that you have now. And again, like an artist, you can use different metaphors. I relate it to being an artist because obviously it just works for me, but that's your raw material. That's your clay. and you say, no, this is what it means now, and I'm going to now choose for it to be a different story. This is the time that I took that ugly thing and I, like a sculptor, I shaped it, I refashioned it. So yeah, all of these things that we're talking about now are that hallmark of that threshold, I would think, that threshold of awareness. And just quickly too, when you mentioned intuition and the people that you see in comments asking about, when I turn off the computer, how do I know? I sit down, I try to meditate, my head gets filled with conflicting thoughts. The thing about intuition to me is all of these words are tricky because they don't have exact definitions. You can argue, obviously, anything in language isn't exactly precise, but even more so when you're talking about emotions and feeling and intuition. And I actually wrote an article on my site I think it's called a taxonomy of feelings. And there's 9 foundational essays on my site, thegreatorder.com, that I kind of lay out in a bigger picture perspective of what I'm about and kind of what's behind what I do a little bit. And it talks about this very thing. And I tease out intuition from emotions. Because emotions and intuition are not the same thing. Emotions are just kind of seismic readings, reactions, telling you things that about a certain circumstance. So if you get angry or you get happy at something, in a certain way, in terms of it just being feedback, it's almost neutral if you frame it in the manner of whether it's a so-called negative emotion or a so-called positive emotion. It's still just the emotion, whatever emotion it is this reading of, it's telling you something. It's giving you feedback about this situation. And what we're talking about is the awareness to then understand what that means and understand what that message is telling you. And intuition, like emotion, I use this metaphor. Emotion feels like a balloon being blown about in the wind. The wind blows the balloon this way, and then the wind blows the balloon that way. When you're really in touch with intuition, it feels more like one of those hot air balloons where someone's actually in the basket and directing it. You feel something deep inside of you is calmer and more at ease. That's what I mean about it not being emotions, even positive emotions. Positive emotions are great. And hey, if you're experiencing a beautiful moment with a loved one, or you're at a party with great friends and you want to enjoy yourself, there's no reason to kind of stop yourself in the moment and say, well, let me analyze why I'm feeling this way. You're dancing around to music. There's, as we said in the beginning, there's times to kind of loosen the reins a little bit on the rational mind, let those other aspects of your humanity through. There's different faculties we have. And when you're dancing, let's say, to your favorite music, you don't want to be too much in your head thinking about it. So, but to get back to what I was saying, intuition does not feel, whether it's positive or negative, it doesn't have that rapture that emotions have, pushing you back and forth like the balloon. There's something more grounded and deeper, and you're in your body. And when you feel that sense of rightness or peace, then you know that you're in touch with that intuition. And that's not to say that intuition doesn't quickly bubble into something exciting. Like I said, like you were saying earlier, you can kind of ping pong between this deep intuition, this just feels right. And then in realizing it feels right, you get kind of excited because you're thinking to yourself, this business partnership or this new relationship, it's exciting. And you let yourself feel that excitement. As I said, I would never advocate for being too stoic so that you don't enjoy those feelings and feel those feelings. And again, that's part of the tapestry of being a person, of being alive. You want to enjoy those things. But yeah, that when I said relationships, I'll just quickly say, because again, I hope I don't sound like I'm rambling. It's just, it's difficult to talk about these things, but these are the things that, some of these are the things that interest me the most. So So here we are talking about them.
What sort of relationships do you mean?
But relationships in any kind, but obviously the most visceral, most people would think, of course, um, is, people, especially probably in today's day and age, for a whole host of reasons and kind of environment we live in, and a kind of environment, social media, getting dopamine hits. People are looking for thrills in relationships, and again, always it's beautiful to have peak moments and have really exciting moments with your loved one, your spouse, partner, whatever the case may be. But when talking in these kinds of terms to kind of help clarify all of this, your I like to think of it in terms of it's not always that it feels like it's just exciting you, like it's a stimulation, as much as that it just feels right. That's not to say, again, there's not moments, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but peak moments, fun, thrill, in love, let it rip. But I feel I've seen certain people, and tell me if you understand what I'm saying, Lorenzo, where almost in that social media age kind of thing, they only expect their partner to be this constant source of dopamine hits and highs. And once you stop getting that from someone, you want to discard them and move on. That's not true, authentic connection. I know that that's not,
Not at all.
what you're about or what New Agora would be about. Even in the ups and downs of a romantic relationship, the challenges or the confusions or the times when there's miscommunication, even if you're both trying your best, is that it feels right. And I kind of want to bring back that word, feeling right, not in terms of being correct, but just in terms of, it's right. Just like your vocation. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be days when you don't have your doubts, or your days when there's work to do to support your vocation, and it might be challenging or it might be annoying, but the overall context is it's right. It just rings true. It gets back, I guess, to the intuition thing that we've been talking about. And I think it could be the same thing with that in a long-term love as well. Is you're looking for that rightness or that true. I love this term true, again, not in terms of being correct, as in factually correct, like we can prove it in a laboratory, scientific reviewed papers, more in the medieval sense or the troubadour sense, the chivalric sense of being true to your heart, or one's aim being true. It's just true, meaning like it rings true. It feels like this is the right thing. It doesn't mean that it's always perfect. It doesn't mean that it's always happy and smiles and there's never confusions, or there's never challenges, or there's never pain. But contained in all of that, you just feel like you're in this bubble of this is right, this is true. So in terms of a romantic relationship, or in terms of your work in the world, what you feel like you're here to do, the talents you're here to share, I really look for that sense of rightness, and connect with people who are on that same wavelength, who are looking to do things where it's that right, true calling. And we help each other, we all help each other stay on our paths of doing that.
100%. I think you feel it. I feel a warmness in my chest when I'm exploring a topic like this one that helps me to understand, and I think is getting through to our viewers. Warmness in my chest when I interact with my wife. It's just a feeling of as you say, developing a metal or a grounding that metal, right? A strength in your spine, let's say. We talked about what it means to be a man in these days, and I think if you get to your centeredness, that will allow you to develop your intuition, as you talked about, will allow you to develop your the ability to steer your way through life. Maybe that's something a lot of people have put to the wayside, or haven't been encouraged to do, is like you really do have to be the captain of your own ship, in every sense of the word, in my opinion. And how you do that is up to each individual, to figure out for themselves. But I would say, steering with your emotions is just going to have you crack on a few rocks eventually. Whereas, getting that rudder in the water and being, balanced, having a lower center of gravity, maybe that's a good way to look at intuition. It seems to come from the
Yeah.
middle of your body. My intuition seems, for me, I can just talk about myself, comes from here. We're trying to, I guess, share the difference with people, whereas my emotions are always up here. I guess that's perhaps a way to describe the bodily sensations.
Do you ever feel, I feel emotions sometimes in my solar plexus or in my gut though. Like if I feel angry or attacked, I can really feel it in my solar plexus. Like I can definitely feel that in my body.
Yeah, I guess the challenge with words is they're just words, right? And so you describe a feeling, and for me, like I don't trust what goes on in my head personally, unless I've begun the process of putting it out there. I've heard way too many bad ideas and bad suggestions and negative traits. I mean, maybe it's just the way I was raised and what was put inside me growing up and things like that. But I tell my head to be quiet 100 times a day to allow other parts of me to develop what's required to keep moving, especially if my head's not.
Here's what's interesting though. Yeah, we all have those voices, but here's a question I have for you then.
Okay.
Have you tried developing words, that deeper part where you can, that wiser, more centered part of yourself, you can still use words to address the more negative or flighty words that you just thought and said, hold on, let's think this through. If I really did that idea, if I went through with that, it would probably lead to this. And it doesn't really feel right. So almost like you're parenting yourself or talking to yourself. Have you tried developing, verbalizing that deeper part? You just said something to the effect, if I caught this right, where you have thoughts come to you and you know that they're a little ungrounded and they're just kind of blowing in the wind, and they might be voices of past programming, a little less than optimal programming, things you heard growing up. And then you acknowledge it, but there's a deeper part that knows that those things wouldn't work, or they're not in your best interest. They're not the highest expression of what you are, right? So have you tried exercising where you begin to verbalize and use the power of the word for that deeper part of yourself?
Well, of course, like I find, or I found, in my opinion, our brain is amazing, or our mind, and if we use it as a tool, it can get you just about anything you require. But if it uses you, like you say, a past programming, then it could lead you down a path maybe that isn't exactly where you want to go. Maybe that's a polite way of putting it. So I've been very lucky in that, in living in Japan, and started studying the Japanese language and studying Japanese people. They use language very differently from North American. And they're, if you, old style Japanese people, when you used to ask them where they think, where their mind is, they would always point here. 100 years ago, they wouldn't point here. So it's very different that they would think in the hara, which is their midsection, as opposed to what's going on up here. And I have these conversations with my wife.
That's fascinating. Yeah. That's fascinating because I wouldn't say I live in my head, but if you ask me where I think in words. I mean, I do think in feeling too. And technically, now that you have me thinking about it, I think in music too, because I dream songs. But when there's that dialogue going on, you're hearing it in words, inner dialogue. That to me is happening up here, because this is where we form words in our brain. So to say where you think or where they speak from, they would point to their chests.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm studying, kanji or logarithms or the pictograms, I guess as they're called. And you'll look up a definition of one in Japan, and it'll mean 20 different things. Like that's why when 2 different or 3 different people translate Chinese or translate Japanese into English, you can get very different stories from the same original source. I found that I was wondering why. And in trying to learn the language now, I'm going, it's crazy, right? This, what does this mean? Well, it can mean this, and it can mean that, and it can mean this, and it can mean that, and it can mean the other thing, and it can mean this thing, depending on the situation and the tone and where you are and who you're talking to and when you're talking to them. Where English is more like, this means this. It's not that direct.
Has that changed your creativity or even how you live your life a little bit?
100%. 100%. My wife will tell me often enough that you're acting like a gaijin, which is, their kind of slang for being a foreigner in certain ways. When I would complain about, let's say, a certain aspect of, let's say, someone I'm doing business with, it's in North America, that says they'll be there a certain time and they're not, or They say they'll do something and they don't. Where in Japan, when you're doing business, it's always 100%. Hakili means specific in Japan. So if someone says they're going to be somewhere at 4 o'clock, they're there. Right? If someone says they're going to do something or not do something, that's the end of it. Or you send an email to a Japanese person, you get a response right away. I got it. Thank you. Where if you'll send it often enough to someone in North America, you won't hear from them for 3 days, right? And you'll say, "Did you get my email?" They go, "Why are you bothering me?" Like, of course I got your email. So just a very different way of looking at how energy is dealt with. And for me, that's just allowed me to expand my own consciousness in looking at myself and seeing, where I came from, how I was raised, as a North American, even as a Canadian, and to allow that to inform. I'm just, the bottom line to put this is, it's just giving me more perspectives for how I can be alive. And so it's been helpful because it gives me more options and opportunities to maybe change what I need to change about myself by seeing that there are ways that are people and other people are alive. It's very different from how I was raised. So it allows me to give myself the permission to maybe change. Because you just
interesting how you're on the one hand you're talking about how the Asian texts are more open to interpretation, or there's different meanings. There's that famous stereotype of, we get tidbits of this in the West, of like when you translate like one sentence in English into Chinese, it becomes this flowery, well, the moon dragons are flying over the rainbow clouds kind of thing. You're like, what? How is that communicating? Like, I want a sandwich. There's funny things like that. But at the same time, Japan, at least where you are, you're saying and I know this to be so, is very precise, which I appreciate. Obviously, we have that in a lot of the West as well, especially Northern Europe, very, very precise. The trains run on time. Switzerland, Germany, Scandinavia, English people I know as well. If you tell them show up to a video meeting like this at 4 o'clock, actually, to be on time is to be 10 minutes early. So you got that as well. But interesting. I would imagine that studying a non-Western language and vice versa for people in Asia studying Western languages with a whole different alphabet system and just everything, like even pictorially how the letters are represented, it has to open up different parts of your mind.
100%.
It has to activate different things.
100%. It's helped me in ways I never knew I always wanted to be helped. Even when I first met my wife and we got married, English is certainly not her first language. And she had very little English at the beginning, right? And I had no Japanese. And yet I had to learn for the first few years of our relationship. Even still, I find we have to communicate through our feelings. And it's working very well, right? Here I am, 10 years later and in growing ways I never imagined, because whenever I get into my head and I start communicating strictly from there, we have problems. But then I have to go back to my centeredness and communicate with how I'm feeling about a situation, and then everything's flowing very well. So, in some ways I put myself in a situation, and there's nothing better or worse or good or bad. I don't want to say, it's better this way or it's worse that way, or, that there's advantages and disadvantages. I think it's more of an artistic way of looking at the many options we have as a person to develop consciousness.
Yeah.
Because in some ways the Western way is better to come up with things, no doubt. In some ways the Eastern way is better to come up with solutions. And these are just my opinions. In some ways, I'm sure there's things I've never learned about, the Arab parts of the world or the South African parts of the world, which I'm sure are even better to come up with, maybe dancing and music. And I'm not sure. It's just, for me, it allows me to not get to that dead end of saying, I know what's right, and this is the way to do things. It's just, there's always that window where I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a better way to come up with a solution to something that's not working for me. And, going back to what you mentioned with blame and not, that's allowed me, if we're going to turn it back to the intuition we were talking about, to not point the finger at myself or someone else when there's a problem, but to go, maybe there's just something I'm not seeing. Maybe there's just a solution that hasn't come to me yet. Maybe there's a way of developing what I need to develop for myself that I'm not conscious of at the moment. And so that's allowed me to further enhance my intuition just by giving me that permission that I get to.
Yeah. Would you say that in any culture that there's certain people that are more apt to have that exploratory nature to begin with, to see life in this more artistic way, and to say, well, I want to take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. Because it seems like it's a certain temperament.
I think so.
I think from my perspective, it seems from what I know, every population has its minority of people who do have that very open exploratory temperament. Obviously you get your artists and that type of person, but it doesn't necessarily have to be confined to artists. There's certain types of scientists that have that kind of openness. There are certain types of business leaders that have to do international business and be nimble enough to deal with different cultures, and they do it through the lens of that vocation of doing their business. But it does seem like this would be overwhelming to certain people. Like I never want to project too much onto other people as well, because there's a certain baseline level that we all, as I was saying earlier, need to have that ability to access the choices that we have and feel like there's a certain level of sovereignty. No one wants to be totally caged in. But when you look at mass consciousness, you look at the way the masses move, and it's an interesting topic to think about right now in the middle of 2021, in the last year and a half that we've experienced with the whole COVID thing, is there's a split in types of people who are questioning the narrative versus there are a lot of people who just want to get by and not rock the boat and be told what to do. And as much as, because we're in a position now where all of our choices are affecting each other. And so a lot of people feel, and we know that this is done largely on purpose, that feel at each other's throats in a way, because we can't ignore each other anymore. We can't just go, you close your door at night, I close my door at night, because I know this is going to be on YouTube. I do shows as well, so I'll keep it pretty neat here. I know there's only so much you could say on YouTube, but even the vaccine thing, some people will say, well, that's none of your business if you ask me if I've had a vaccine. But the polar opposite perspective exists as well, where they're like, this is a public health crisis, and it actually is my business to know if you believe the media narrative and you believe that there's something that maybe is not going to kill everybody, but it's still dangerous enough where people are dying from it. And you walk into my restaurant and you're not, you haven't been vaccinated. Hey, sure. Some people say, hey, I want to know this because you might be affecting me and my family. So this whole thing about, I wish more people, on the one hand, I wish, because of the circumstances right now, specific to where we're living right now, what's going on right now as we speak. Yeah, I do wish more people were asking more questions and willing to ask questions. On the other hand, it doesn't seem that the way that things really work is you'd want a society where every last person is questioning everything before breakfast. I think you need actually a majority of people to just get up and, this is my job, this is what I do, and they go do it. And as long as they feel some degree of satisfaction in that, I know a lot of people don't. So even that indicates maybe a more idealistic world. But I think most people they want to do something that they enjoy, have with their family, know that they have a roof over their head, they can eat, they can eat tomorrow, and that's about it.
For sure.
I have to be careful because I know what you mean. I have the same temperament of, I'm an artist, so I like to take from here and take from there. But what I've seen is, I'll bring this back to the question of power and control with the COVID situation. Not to ascribe too much, not to cut them too much slack, but in trying to understand so-called elites, the powers that be. And I don't think that they're really elites, because I think truly the term elite denotes something about character. And these people, they might be higher than average intelligence, but they certainly don't have the character to be called elites, leaders in a society, as we know that they're often psychopathic people. And that was really what motivated them to get to the tops of where they are. But a problem I see, even maybe in the managerial class and like the lower levels that think that they're doing the right thing, is a word I used a few minutes ago, a lot of projection. So if people like me, who maybe are a little more flexible, and maybe a lot of the people here, maybe a lot of your listeners, but I think I'll offer this just as a point of self-awareness to anyone who, might help them or resonate with them, because I've had to wrestle with this myself, is you don't want to get into this situation where you think you're oh so special and so great because you're more flexible and you're more worldly and you're more open-minded than most of the masses. Because I think what you see now, not the only element, there's many elements. And as I said, there's many others that are far more nefarious. I'm not cutting them any slack, but just to understand the temperament of the types of people who are serving the agenda right now, who are serving the whole shebang, believe it at that. They really do think that they're a different breed. They're a breed apart. They're special because they're created, more flexible minded, they're more open, et cetera, et cetera. And they develop a disdain for just down to earth, salt of the earth working people. And we've seen this, there's supposed to be this organic connection between the different strata of society and the different classes or the different temperaments and the different types, so that a society as a whole. And now we have this crazy situation, especially in the West, as far as I know, where our leadership classes in most Western countries are decidedly against the native populations, trying to replace them with mass immigration, totally unnatural levels of immigration, and propaganda, and all sorts of things, outsourcing. Like, why do I live in the United States and everything is made in China? It just doesn't make sense. Even a lot of food. I go to get organic meat, and unless it's like a local farm, even the organic meat, sometimes it's from Brazil or it's from Australia. It has to cross an ocean. I mean, we can't work it out where I live in America. We have plenty of farmland. I can't get organic meat at a local supermarket that's grown here. You're telling me it still costs less to ship it across an ocean or halfway around the world from Australia? So you look at all kinds of things like that. You start to say, these decisions were not made. All the things, this is the accumulation of things that have happened over decades and decades and decades before we were born. All the decisions that have accumulated and led to the situation we're in now could not have been made by people who had a genuine organic love, like an actual order, the way like a sacred king is supposed to be the steward of his people.
100%.
They're like the polar opposite of that, an exploitative kind of disdain for those people. So I think, even those of us who think that we're a lot different from those people, if you realize that you have that creative temperament, that flexible temperament, you still have to catch yourself and say, there's a specialness to the normal person as well. There's a specialness to the people that just want to get up and go to work and come home to the white picket fence. And it's, I come from a city. I come from a group of friends who were artists growing up, and we weren't, I'd like to think, I can say with relative amount of confidence, we really weren't disdainful towards those types, but there's still, admittedly, when you're younger and you realize you're an artist, you're a little different. There's still sometimes those little hints, those little strands of, oh yeah, we're different. We're interesting. We're not going to go just have boring lives and just go to work and be buttoned up. But then you realize it's like you wouldn't be the outlier if there wasn't a normative baseline to kind of play off of. In relief, almost like a sculpture in relief. Like there needs to dimension. If you're an outlier because most people are that way. And so I do have a love, and I try to have a lot of patience for those people out there, even those people who are going along with things right now because maybe that's just the best they know. Like, I'll give you an example, even from this song coming up. What's in Us, again, is the title of it. There's a line that says, I cannot hate who fall for lies, those who fall for lies. I don't like that they fall for lies, but I can't hate them. You know, I don't want to come at them with that energy.
Yeah. I mean, for yourself, it's a waste of time, and it brings, whatever hate brings into your body. I think the word maybe we've been dancing around for the last 15 or 20 minutes. The difference between, I like our editor, he calls the elites the ankle biters, which I think puts them exactly where they belong, or the overschmoes.
Flip it. Yes, flip it.
But I would think
I'm gonna have to plug in. I'm just gonna go off screen. You can keep talking. I just have to plug in the computer for the power strip here. I lost power. But go ahead. But I'm listening.
Okay. I think maybe, now that Jared's gone for a moment, I think empathy might be the word that he's looking for. Because if you have empathy, you can't really hate someone. You can understand the choices they make. Maybe you don't respect them, or maybe in that you don't think the right choices are the choices you would make. But, having empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it's been a challenge of mine my whole life. But as I've developed that on purpose for myself, and, look from the other person's perspective, I think it gives you a natural grounding towards your intuition, because, part of it, intuition would be to see the world around you and to understand how, you're relating and how others are relating to you in relation to whatever you're trying to relate about. So I would say, empathy would be a good watermark, a good measure of a lot of what Jared's been suggesting as to how you can be different. I mean, even if you're in a different culture, or you're in a different society, or a different age, a different generation, different economic strata, whatever. If you have empathy, it's automatically going to negate a lot of the negatives, I think, from an emotional standpoint, as towards what it is that you would like to create, especially in relationship, because most problems come from not having empathy for the other people or persons or countries you're relating to. You're just coming from, this is me, this is what, my, the narcissist perspective, right? Just me.
Right.
It's funny, and I'll just share one thing, which is interesting, from a modern perspective is, I've been watching some disaster videos with weather over the last couple of days, and just seeing the reactions that people are having when they're being faced with the unknown, a tornado or a flood or a windstorm or a hailstorm. And I heard many times people in the background going, I don't like it. Stop it. I don't like it. And, the weather doesn't give two toots, two toots of a dog's ass, whether you like it or not. But it just seems, it just is. It's weather. Deal with it or don't. It's not going to stop because you like it or don't like it. And I think that's pretty much how the modern person has been co-opted, as far as being able to develop their own inner responsible choices in life. It's been directed towards what they like and don't like, like I like on a YouTube thing, or I like on a Instagram or a social media, or I dislike. And it's like, who gives a fuck? If you pardon my language, what you like and don't like, it's more like what's going on and how that's affecting the world around you. If you come from that perspective, perhaps it'll give you more of a grounding towards developing your intuition. We'll turn it back to that, because maybe we've talked about people learning to heal themselves and develop intuition and how they can move through life. Empathy.
Yes. In personal relationships, absolutely. Empathy. I understand what you're saying. And not that you wait for the other person, but we talked a little bit about this, I guess, when I made my intro on that video I did with the other gentleman, the short prelude to the new now that I mentioned in the beginning that you put out about a week ago, is I'm always looking for the points of balance where, I see everything as a harmony of poles. And that's kind of the underlying theme of those 9 essays I mentioned before. If you go to the why page on my site, thegreatorder.com.
Why? Why?
Yeah, on the menu on top, it's called the why. It's a little, I guess, more of a highfalutin way to say about, because, I'm an artist and sometimes I need to do things in the hard way. But there's links to 9 essays there. And when I mentioned taxonomy of feelings, when we were talking about the difference between intuition versus emotion earlier, one of the essays is specifically on that. But running throughout all of these, I realized it was, it's long, it's there if people want to read it. I definitely don't expect everyone who goes to my site to read it. But I did it for myself. I wanted to write out these thoughts for myself, just to clarify, as we were saying earlier, the power of your words, before I started one video, one website entry. And they've really remained largely unchanged since I published my site a few years ago. But getting back to what we're talking about now, Lorenzo, is the theme running throughout all of them, and it really culminates in the last one on love, is the harmony of poles. It's like, look how we got here, male and female. There's two halves of your body. What is that about? There's, you left leg, right hemisphere of the brain, left hemisphere of the brain. I know in the few times we've spoken, again, this seems to come up. So maybe it's good that we get to this in this longer form talk today. So on the one hand, you're talking about empathy, and I hear you loud and clear, and people need that in their relationships. But the yin to the yang there is boundaries. So when I was speaking earlier about a lot of my work has led me to this moment of crisis that we're in the West, and realizing I'm a man of the West, and that means something, and it's up to me to steward. No one else gets to steward it but people of the West. I'm a man of the West, and we're living in an insane time right now, where we're told, we have our children being told that they have this unique original sin because they're of European descent, colloquially known as white. We know race isn't just about skin color, but it's a stand-in word for people of European descent, more or less. And if anyone thinks that that's not the case, you're lying to yourself. Come on, you know what white means. So on one hand, there's the empathy, there's the openness. But if it's twisted around and you tell college-aged kids, hold up refugees welcome sign and don't question the narrative, don't question are they really refugees or not, when they're fighting age men, and most of them aren't from Syria, and the Syrian crisis is years old at this point. And if anyone doesn't believe me, I'm actually citing the UN's own, this isn't conspiracy right-wing stuff, this is the UN's own numbers on it. It's like, it was over 70% men when Angela Merkel decided to be the mommy of Europe and open up the gates. They didn't go to the nearest safe country, which is what refugees are supposed to do in times of war. They kept going until they got to the fat cow welfare states like Germany, like Sweden, where there's so many problems now because of this. So I can't sit here in good faith and only talk about, in the world that we live in, and seeing the very, very dire results of that kind of thinking. I wouldn't be able to tell my whole story and represent myself without mentioning that the other side of that coin is, in fact, a very strong, bold, robust assertion of boundaries. Because I see this quote unquote morality like a card show, like a magic show. Look at what this hand's doing, but not this hand's doing. This lopsided narrative about morality, how you have to have infinite borders open. All these celebrities who talk about this, but how many of these people are they letting into their house, and how many armed bodyguards do they walk around with if you're an A-list Hollywood celebrity? And all of this cheap talk, lip service about openness and tolerance, but it's actually being used to break down a people and peoples,
For sure.
and break down parts of our civilization, break down our defense. And I'm sure that there are equivalents we can find with the COVID narrative as well. This is what it's why I mentioned in the beginning. I think that there's a convergence of awakenings, and some people are more focused on this agenda. Some people are more focused on that agenda. But I'm interested in, as long as you are one of those people who are awake or awakening and asking questions and thinking for yourself a little bit, I think it's a really interesting time to cross-pollinate those different spheres, and that's part of why I'm here and do this, because I'm kind of coming full circle, because you mentioned Red Ice. I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with Red Ice, but just briefly, I actually had a similar trajectory to what Henrik and Lana, the two people behind Red Ice, the kind of story they were on. I found them as just a reader some years ago when they were doing more spiritual, alt news kind of things.
Me too.
Sometimes people could say, I know this isn't the best term, but conspiracy theory type stuff, just to use, a quick turn of phrase that people would recognize. And then because they're truth seekers, and because they didn't put a limit on where their minds go, they looked at the narrative in their own in the West. And Lana, her family had to flee the Soviet Union. They're of largely Russian ancestry, came to the United States, has a particular soft spot in her heart for that brand of tyranny and the lies that are told in narratives. So long story short is that the two main people behind Red Ice, Henrik and Lana, they kind of went on this arc where they started with this more spiritual, exploratory, alt news. We'll talk to anybody, esoteric, a lot of esoteric people. I'm sure some people that you talk to have also spoken with them. And then they got more specifically into the defense of Western civilization and saying we're European peoples and we need to hold on, like we need to look at what's going on here. And when they started doing that, they lost their access to bank accounts and things like that. I wonder why. If we're so privileged and we're in power, I wonder why. I've experienced the same thing. I've lost my first YouTube channel. I lost PayPal. I lost Venmo, different payment processors. Why? Why would that be? But in talking to you, Lorenzo, it's interesting for me because I'm coming full circle. As you mentioned, I eventually, through different opportunities, I got to meet up with Henrik and Lana and do some videos for them. And they've been on shows that I do. So we're acquainted, and they're lovely people. And I've had the pleasure of doing 4 short form videos for them, special presentation videos with them. But for me, talking to someone like you, it's actually returning to where I began. But now there's all this other stuff as well. So I was very much spiritual, open, and goes with being an artist. And I still have that very much. You can't get away from what you are at the core. But in a personal way, in speaking about it publicly, in speaking about the more nitty gritty attacks on the West, I'm a man of the West kind of thing publicly, it helped me articulate those boundaries better. And so now I'm able to return to these more spiritual kinds of conversations about intuition and consciousness and awareness, and further it, or complete that, bring more pieces into the mosaic from the more, I don't want to say political work I've done, because I'm not really political. I don't follow politics day to day. I'm not a news guy. But in doing what I do, and in hosting certain shows that I'm on, and moving in certain circles that I move in, that has been a large focus of what I'm doing. And it's interesting. You're not the only person. It's interesting to see kind of the crossover, because I remember when you first reached out to me, I went to the New Agora site, and again, even though I was not familiar particularly with New Agora, but when I was younger, my head went more towards, again, this kind of spiritual thing. And I said to you, just out of respect to you, you might remember one of my first emails to you was something effective. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I do? I talk about white people in the West, and, the most vilified subject, even though we're privileged, the most vilified subject in the world. And you were like, yeah, and I understand the way it all fits together. And I had a lot of respect for that, Lorenzo. I have to say, I appreciate that. And I've met some other people that way too, who are spiritual, and they're not who the media would paint. Because, okay, you know how you said earlier, Lorenzo, that there's a certain level of consciousness, the opposite of empathy, where it's all what I want, and it's rah, 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 like we're the best. what's painted in a very one-dimensional way, in a very superficial way, is that if you are of European descent and you advocate in any way, shape, or form in a positive manner for the different ethnicities that make up the European peoples and Western civilization, that it's purely that kind of grug, caveman, baseline, rah, 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 we're team white energy. That's what Hollywood tells you. That's what the news tells you. Increasingly, that's what policy is enacting to teach our children in public schools with taxpayer money in the US, in Canada, in many European countries, in Australia. And I wanted to come at this as one of the people, there's many of us, one of the people who does have my artistic, open, spiritual background, and yet can still integrate those boundaries into it. It's not a one or the other kind of thing. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, I feel that it completes that holistic balance that I've been talking about a lot of this time. So that's some more background and kind of why it's interesting for me to talk to you at this juncture, and it seems like it's tying a lot of different threads together. So for myself, in a personal way, it's a convergence of awakenings. And as I said, when I look out into the world, it seems that that's what's going on out there as well. There's COVID, there's lockdown marches. I've spoken to someone who's been documenting the lockdown marches in London. There's people who are concerned about other political things going on. There's people concerned about the attacks on Western civilization that I've been mentioning. But there's crossover among all of these things. And it's important for people to dialogue and understand and get through the stereotypes.
100%.
As I've said, the people that care about Western civilization are not all ultra tribalistic people that are just like, we're the best. And it's I'm not, and the people who are my friends and colleagues are not coming from that energy, from that perspective at all. It's just a rebalancing. And what we want is true diversity. That's a buzzword that's been perverted and co-opted. We want true diversity so that the world is this beautiful garden and there's all different types of people. And yes, to get back to what we were talking about before, there are some people from each culture that are going to be the ones who shake things up. But just because I might be able to travel around and be friends with all different types of people from all different walks of life, it doesn't mean that we have to make every last zip code in the Western world a melting pot. It's really not. That's the definition of genocide. Let's just be frank. Even America wasn't really founded that way at all. If you look at the founding documents, and even if you say that it became something else, the melting pot thing, there's a lot of people in my circles that criticize that and say that that's kind of a psyop. But even if you were to take it that way, what's interesting is about 100 years ago, even less, the earlier decades of the 20th century, there's a term they used more that you don't hear now about the States, and that's salad bowl. A melting pot is when you mix everything together, but a salad bowl is you don't put a salad in a blender. You still have your tomatoes and your cucumbers and your celery and your lettuce in different parts. Even if you do posit that America was some kind of, it definitely wasn't founded this way. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers, but if you look at the Naturalization Act of 1790, it's not what the founding fathers thought. They said it was their posterity. It's Northwest Europeans, sorry. But even if you take a narrative that says we can't undo this, we did go in that melting pot direction too much, it was supposed to be a salad bowl. It's supposed to be some different cultures, but still you have to have a spine. You have to have a default. And you can't deny that largely, yes, there's different contributions by different people that came here. I get it. But largely the customs, the holidays, the architecture, the civics, the laws, which goes back to the old Norse things and the Anglo-Saxon and has roots in the Magna Carta. It's European. It's specifically Northwestern European. That's what culturally the bedrock of the United States is. And increasingly, even saying that, this is crazy, but even saying that puts you in a position where you could be in trouble with the powers that be.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think it comes with discernment. I think, to tie all this in a way that makes it easy or easier, I would think, for anybody to go through this is to really look at where their information is coming from. I think that's the bottom line for all of it. Like where are you getting your facts? Where are you getting your, whether it's a melting pot or immigration. I mean, who's pushing it? Who's saying it? Why they're saying it? What's their agenda? And why is it coming out the way that it's coming out? And yeah, I think it goes back to, and by empathy, I never meant, have good feelings for the next person, right? Always wish nice things on them, because that's a new age bullshit garbage, in my opinion, as well. It's like empathy, like if someone's evil and you're empathic, you'll feel it, right? If someone doesn't have your best interest at heart, whether they're an immigrant or your neighbor, if you have your empathy working, just means you feel the other guy, right? So if they have nefarious intentions, no matter what their words are, you'll get it, right? And that will allow you, I think,
that's being sensitive. That's being sensitive. Sure.
Being sensitive, that will allow you, like there's good white people, bad white people, good black people, bad. We can go on forever, but
yeah, that's not the point of it. The point of it is that when people are in groups,
yes,
they form a group. There's an average group consciousness that creates the norms of how family life works and customs and how people communicate. And that's what people lose. They'll say, it's like, well, Jared, would you rather have some rowdy drug addict white neighbor or a high IQ polite Indian neighbor? And you're missing the point.
Right.
You're missing the point completely. Just because I advocate for what I advocate for doesn't mean I can't and haven't been friends with people of all backgrounds. As I said, I'm an artist. I grew up in a major city. That's my background. But at the same time, if you put way that the Asian mind works and everything you told me before, if you put 10 million Asian people on Mars and you put 10 million European people, and I know these are all large masses and there's ethnicities within, but for argument's sake, you put 10 million European peoples, or we'll be more specific, you put 10 million German people on the moon and you put 10 million Japanese people on Mars, we could terraform and we could travel to these places quickly. Let's say the technology is there. The German people would recreate something. It would interface with the environment of the moon, of their little moon colony, but it would reflect German ideals and German instincts. And the Japanese colony on the Mars would reflect the Japanese mind. There is something to that. I don't make a god of it. I don't make a god of any of this stuff, but to deny it to the point that it's being denied and weaponized and turned against us and used to confuse us in media and education. That's what I have an issue with. And in terms of feeling good about people, yes, in the moment when your alarm goes off and you know someone's dangerous, you know someone doesn't have that core, and you know that they're way off balance, of course, you have to remove yourself from the situation, protect yourself. Again, this is where it's a mosaic. It's a balance of all of these things. But I do believe that in the privacy of your own home or your own time, when you are in a safe place, I always believe that, like, my last thought about someone or a situation, going back to what we were talking earlier about your awareness, a level of awareness being something of a filter or a purifier, I will put that person in a better place in my mind, or I will imagine them getting to a point where they do realize the evil that they're doing, or they make amends, however that looks for them in their soul's story. So again, it's a little bit of both. You have to protect yourself in the moment, but you could always choose to put someone in your own energy, put someone once you're in the safer place and you're in your private thoughts, you use your thoughts, your words, your energy to wish the best for them, pray the best for them, send them the best energy that they can heal from whatever sickness they have. And it's hard to do when they're hurting people that you know or love, or they've hurt you. It's a challenge, I know, but my life has never been worse for it. My life has never been worse for it. It's only been better for when I get that pang of anger or that instinct to want to get even with someone. But let's say the situation is done, is to put them in a better place mentally, or to, to write an email and just say, this is an olive branch, and just, I want to leave on a good note. It's always been, for me, it's led to good things.
I hear you. It's not always
You feel
possible,
better.
but at least you're sharing with the world how you are, and you're allowing them to, rise to the occasion of being more loving. So, in me, that's the best of what you can do as a real person on the planet. As you allow others to maybe rise to a loving spot, and if they do, they do, and if they don't, you can make choices from there.
That's the crux. I'm glad you said that, just briefly, of what I wanted to say. And I don't know if what I said earlier about the West and my heritage, some people will get it, and maybe some people will be challenged by it in your audience. I'm not sure. But ultimately, to me, again, in those essays I wrote, the one that ends on love, love includes boundaries. This is the crux where I think we're, again, being manipulated by mainstream narratives. We're told that accepting anyone in your country is just endless, 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 endless is love. And if you're not doing that, you're not loving. That's not how it works. Love implies boundaries, because we love our nations too. We love our children. We only have so many seats in our schools for our children. We only have so many beds in our hospitals. And
of course,
it's pitched to us as this love thing, but it's not. It's ludicrous. In terms of the refugees from the Middle East, there's ludicrous amounts of space and resources in ludicrously wealthy nations right next to them in the Arab world that speak, or at least languages closer to their language, if it's terms of the actual Syrian refugees, and a culture that's much closer to them. It's not the emergency that it's painted as, but even so, do you invite every homeless person you pass on the street into your house, especially if you have a young daughter or son in your house? A parent has to weigh these options of, yes, there's a time and a place to give to your community and help those in need and things like that, but you have the boundary of your house, you have your children to protect. That's what's been thrown out. So that's where I'm coming from. I just want to leave that with anyone who's listening and maybe new to these thoughts, and maybe they haven't really encountered this before, especially in kind of a spiritual kind of context. I can assure you I'm not the only one. I have friends and colleagues who think similarly, but it's that love implies boundaries. If you loved everyone in the same expression, then love would mean nothing. I love my brother in a way that's different than in a way I love a romantic partner. It is different in a way that I love my parents. Like, love has different expressions. It creates different spheres. And then, yes, I can have a more diffuse brotherly love in a certain respect for just the average person I pass in the street, a certain regard, but it's not the same thing. It's not love with a capital L the way it is for the people closest to you, because if it wasn't, it would mean nothing, and life would all be flat. And what would be the purpose of that? So love, as wonderful as it is to think about love, the heart of love being very generous, and the spirit of love always wanting to see the best in people. And I try to do that, but it's bitten me in the ass sometimes. I'm sure it has you too, trying to see the best in people or assuming the best in people. I understand that. I've been in those states. I've been walking down the street or in nature, but it believe it or not, it can happen on a concrete sidewalk as well, where you're in that vibration so strongly of love that you can't, it's impossible to even consider a hateful thought towards someone else. Like, I've experienced that without drugs, by the way, for what it's worth. I know what that is. I know what that open, generous spirit is. But again, with the male to the female, everything being the two poles to create and sustain life, without boundaries, then everything would be diffuse and meaningless, and it would be nothing. It's not the same love for everyone all the time in the same way.
Of course, a seedling needs its space to grow, right? If you start a unique plant, needs its nurturing. It might need its boundaries to get strong, put down good roots, and then it can do what it needs to do. So for sure. Well, Jared, I think we've gone over a little bit. This has been a great chat. I love where you've brought it up and brought it around, and I totally agree. Love has boundaries. You don't want to have 100 people in your bed every night, or as you said, or have 7 or 8 wives, unless I guess that's your direction in life. It's more like everyone should choose for themselves what works and how they need to grow strong. And I always suspect anyone that's trying to tell me what my love is or what love is or what anything is. I'll define it all for myself, because I figure, I've grown up. I'm a man, I'm an adult, and I can figure all this out for myself. And as soon as someone's trying to tell me, how I should think or what I should think or what's wrong, I always find that suspect in relation to what I need to choose for myself and, how I need to go and move forward. All right. So we were tying up in many ways this conversation. I should have figured that when we chose the topic, what's inside us, might get huge, because it just seems the deeper we go, the deeper there seems to be to go. The more you explore, the more there seems to be to explore. And that's a good thing. I feel, if you get a chance to see who you are, whether you're white, brown, purple, it's just a matter of, like, I grew up in Toronto. I do want to say this, and it was very diverse. There was Little Italy, Little Portugal, Chinatown, one of the biggest in North America, Koreatown, etc. Little Italy. And I loved it, and nobody was pushing it on me. It was just, you like going to Italy and enjoying that feeling. You like going to Koreatown and enjoying that feeling. You like going to Little India, right? I used to love that, and you enjoy that feeling. And, you put it all together into a mishmash, and you're just going to get, probably something that doesn't taste very good.
They had their spheres. And again, I grew up in a major city too, and my temperament, it works for certain people. It works for certain people in certain places. I'm just saying, if it wasn't, hopefully I was clear before, that there are some pretty nefarious agendas right now that go a lot deeper than that kind of thing, of just having Little Italy and Little India in certain cities.
What I mean is, I was agreeing with you in that, you need your boundaries, have their boundaries. It made it beautiful, and nobody cared, and nobody was being pushed, and white people weren't bad, and this wasn't good. It was more like everyone was left to do what they felt like doing in relation to their culture. And it worked very well in building stronger relationships, because you got to build from where you wanted to build from, and nobody was pushing. No one's going to want someone to push extra people into their bedroom at night, or to say, now that everyone's equal, if you're a man, you got to sleep with another man. If that's not your feeling, it is whatever. Enjoy your life. But it's just, when things get pushed on you, I think as you're being bad, if you don't listen to some outside source of authority, I figure that's where the problems begin.
I agree with you. It definitely raises an eyebrow, if nothing else, as to why there's that agenda in the first place, as you said. And whenever anyone's telling you how to live your life, it's probably a good idea to ask, well, what do they want out of this?
Yeah.
Why are they doing this? Yeah. But I don't think we need to restate that for your community here.
No.
I'm sure that they're all here because they're already that way. And again, there's only so much we could get to, even in whatever we spoke today, an hour and a half. It flew by, and we went longer than we thought, but it's been a pleasure. But there's so much more that we can talk about, but I'm happy to be here. As I said, it's kind of a return to some of my interests, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see what the different combination of personalities is like and things like that. But I'm showing up, experimenting with this, and joining Lorenzo in this experiment, this open forum. And I really appreciate being here. I hope it was interesting and useful for anyone that stayed with us this long, listened this whole time.
Well, I'm happy to take it further. I'm happy to dive deeper with you, Jared, as it works for both of us. I'm happy to bring others of like feeling and even opposite feeling into the conversation to see where it goes. It's always of interest to me to flow with consciousness and allow myself to learn more. Jared will be joining us. He's graciously agreed to perhaps release his new song, or not release it, but share it with our audience when we go live July 21st from 2 to 5 p.m. Pacific. It'll be one of the first times it's heard, so you could consider it a launch. Yeah, one of the launches. So What's in Us is the name of Jared's new song from the great
in us.
What's in Us. Join us. He'll be around 3 p.m. once again Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and I'm sure we'll all have lots more to enjoy and share and be. Jared, anything you care to leave our viewers with on our way out here?
I just want to reiterate my thanks again. Appreciate it. And for anyone interested, anything we might have said today, my whole catalog of everything that I do is through thegreatorder.com. You get to my music page quickly. I kind of have a sub page off of that, but you could get there. So main thing is thegreatorder.com. It's easy, just one thing to remember.
I'll leave our links below so people can follow through if they want to. Be sure to sign up for the event because it's free, but you must sign up to be there. If anybody has any questions or suggestions, you can leave a description or a comment below. You can send me an email. I can pass it along to Jared if you don't have his contact. And we both, it seems to me, have enjoyed this time very much and enjoyed your...
Very much, yes.
And I like it. I love it. Thank you all for being here. I hope to do this again with Jared very, very soon. And I hope to see you all back. I love you all very much.
Can't make me lie to my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Freedom first is what I say.